University and is currently a lecturer at Osaka University. She has worked in philosophy of language, semantics, and pragmatics. And she has recently published 4 books in Japanese about language and communication. And one of them is a monograph about philosopher Paul Grice. And today's talk is also about Grice. And the title is Gricean Pragmatics according to himself. So, Miki-san, could you please your slides and start your talk? Okay. Could you please start?
Okay, thank you for introducing me. I'm very honored to speak here, and I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It was actually a little bit surprising because I'm not really a formal linguist or not even linguist. I'm a philosopher, and my research is not one of formal philosophy. So I was very pleased to get invitation, but I was surprised and wondered, what can I talk about at the length, and wondered. And I decided all I can talk about is philosophy. So I'd like to talk about philosophy today. More particularly, I'd like to talk about the philosophy of Paul Grice. Wait a minute. Okay. I think most of you, perhaps all of you, know his theory of implicature. It is his most famous and influential achievement. However, I also think most people do not know what the overall picture of his philosophy is like. The aim of this talk, my talk, is to place his theory of implicature in his larger philosophical system and infer what Gricean pragmatics would be like if Grice himself conceived it. Let me introduce my research first. I'm working in the field of philosophy of language. My main topic is the concept of speaker meaning, especially the regress of speaker's intention problem. My view is that intention-based analysis cannot evade this problem, and we should rely on Margaret Gilbert's notion of joint commitment instead of intention to explain speaker meaning. I propose this view in my 2019 book in Japanese, 話しての意味の心理性と公共性, which can be translated as the psychological and public aspects of speaker meaning. And in the course of this research, I've read a wide range of Grice's papers and lectures. In fact, probably, I think all of the ones that have been published. For example, like his interpretation of Aristotle or something. And what most interests me are the unique and rich arguments he was developing outside of the field of philosophy of language. I was also impressed by the highly systematic nature of his various arguments. I think many people who know Grice know him just for his philosophy of language, especially his theory of implicature. But in fact, his philosophy of language is a part of his philosophy of mind, and his philosophy of mind is connected with his philosophy of reason as a human faculty. And behind all of them, there's his rich metaphysical theory. So Grice's theory of conversational implicature may seem at first to be just a redescription of our everyday commonsensical view of communication. However, even his most famous paper, Logic and Conversation, there are references to, for example, transcendental arguments, or Immanuel Kant's concepts of categories, reason or rationality, inference and mental states. And all of these themes run through his philosophy, and he speaks about these topics in a variety of areas, including metaphysics, value theory, and philosophy of mind. So through the lens of his overall philosophy, his theory of implicature appears differently. I hope to show what the view looks like through the lens of his overall philosophy. So first, I'd like to show an overview of Grice's philosophy. His theory of conversational implicature is first introduced in his 1961 article, Causal Theory of Perception, and developed in the 1967 William James lectures. These lectures are published in different years in these forms. And the paper, Causal Theory of Perception, this one, attempts to defend so-called sense data theories of perception. And it is a theory that the direct object of our perception is not not a real object, but a sense data. And he relies on the concept of implicature to argue against some counter-arguments to the sense data theory. I think using a theory of conversation implicature this way might be surprising, but actually this is the very purpose he he thought it would serve. In his understanding, some philosophers confuse, on the one hand, cases we don't use a word because using it in this context contradicts its meaning. And on the other hand, cases we don't use a word because if we did, inappropriate conversational implicatures would arise. These are different types of cases, but many philosophers did not distinguish these types. So he thought we can find such confusion in influential counter-arguments against sense data theory and in other areas of philosophy as well. So for Grice, his theory of conversational implicature was an essential part of his philosophical methodology, which he calls conceptual analysis. Conceptual analysis is a method of analyzing a concept in light of its everyday use. Grice thought this method is shared among Oxford ordinary language philosophers such as John Austin and Peter Strawson, but he also thought other philosophers than Grice himself did not use this method properly because they made the confusion I have talked about. So for Grice, a proper application of this method, conceptual analysis, requires a proper theory of conversational implicature. His philosophical methodology has developed over time from 40s to 60s. And in the 1967 article, Prolegomena, which is virtually the introduction of the William James lectures, he explicitly points to the essential importance of the theory of conversation implicature for his methodology. And perhaps, I think because of such a background, even after he proposed his theory of conversational implicature, he was interested not so much in empirical analysis of everyday conversation as philosophical analysis of the concepts used in this theory of implicature, such as saying, and conventional implicature. Into this context, he brought his other famous achievement, the analysis of the concept of meaning. This project began before the theory of conversational implicature. It began 1957 article Meaning. It is now known in the name of intention-based semantics. He argued his intention-based analysis of meaning would provide a conceptual basis for his theory of implicature. He argued this mainly in this article, utterance meaning, sentence meaning, and word meaning. And in this one, utterance meaning and intentions. So far, what I've talked about is rather a well-known story of Grice, I think. But I think it is less known that he has his unique theory of intention and other mental states. I call it an axiomatic theory of mind. I suppose many people who hear Grice's project of analyzing the concept of meaning in terms of speakers' intentions will think of intention here, the concept of intention here, as referring to a physiological state of the brain or something that arises in the mind. Actually, this is not what Grice himself thought. For Grice, psychological states are not properly states. This argument was developed mainly in this is presidential address to the American Philosophical Association in 1974 and published next year, 1975. The focus of my talk today is to show what his philosophy of mind is like and how we can understand the concept of conversational implicature in light of this theory of mind. His axiomatic theory of mind is based on his understanding of reasoning. And the latter, this one, is discussed in the lecture Aspects of Reason. Just a minute. This lecture is posthumously published in 2001. I think he used his method of this conceptual analysis throughout the development of his philosophy, but it is not always explicit. And he also has a unique metaphysical theory, which he calls constructivism. I'm not going to talk about metaphysics, but in my understanding, this constructivist metaphysics is a key to his peculiar style of transcendental arguments. As just an aside, this one, 1982 paper, Meaning Revisited, seems at first to be just a paper on the philosophy of language, but it in fact covers his philosophy of mind and his constructivist metaphysics as well. So without knowing the detail of what he says in these areas, one cannot accurately understand this article. So to me, this article seems to be the richest text among Grice's papers, but this is just aside. So let's move on to conversational implicature. As you know, Grice's theory of conversational implicature is based on cooperative principle and 4 kinds of conversational maxims. Some people, I'm not sure, but it seems to me some people conceive the principle, cooperative principle, and maxims as a kind of mechanism which takes a proposition as input and produces another proposition as output. And think of Grice's theory of conversational implicature this way. I mean, as a kind of proportional calculation. But the derivation of conversational implicature is not just an operation of proportional contents, at least in Grice's argument. Let's look at what Grice said. Quote, it's a bit too long, but quote, a man who by in vain saying or making as if to say that P has implicated that Q may be said to have conversationally implicated that Q, provided that, first, he is to be presumed to be observing the conversational maxims, or at least the cooperative principle. Second, the supposition that he is aware that or thinks that Q is required in order to make his saying or making as if to say P, or doing so in those terms consistent with this presumption. This presumption refers to this one. And third, the speaker thinks and would expect to the hearer to think that the speaker thinks that it is within the competence of the hearer to work out or grasp intuitively that the supposition mentioned in second condition is required, unquote. Some might think of conversational implicature just through the first and second conditions. But as this quotation shows, Grice himself posits the third condition as well. This is about what the speaker thinks. In other words, this condition refers to an attribution of psychological attitudes to the speaker. This point is more explicit in this clause. A general pattern for the working out of a conversational implicature might be given as follows. He has said that P, there's no reason to suppose that he is not observing maxims or at least a cooperative principle. He could not be doing this unless he thought that Q. He knows and knows that I know that he knows that I can see that the supposition that he thinks that Q is required. He has done nothing to stop me thinking that Q. He intends me to think, or at least willing to allow me to think that Q, and so he has implicated that Q. The whole story is told through the lens of what the speaker has in their mind. Especially important point is that even if the audience calculates the proportional content Q here, unless they attribute the relevant intention, this one, unless they attribute the relevant intention to the speaker, they cannot assume the speaker conversationally implicate Q. So according to Grice, the working out of conversational implicature is not a matter of proportional calculation, but in this way, but rather a matter of attribution of mental states. So Grice says, looking at the speaker's action of utterance, the hearer attributes some mental states to the speaker. And then, and if some kind of intention, if the hearer attributes some kind of intentions to the speaker, then the hearer can assume the speaker conversationally implicates something. This is what Grice talks about. But why is this so? because Grice understands the concept of meaning in terms of intention. He's not explicit about the relation between implicature and speaker meaning, but generally speaking, conversational implicature is supposed to be a species of speaker meaning. And he argues the necessary and sufficient conditions of speaker meaning. Speakers meaning something by their utterance can be given in terms of the speaker's intentions. So his view on speaker meaning can be depicted as this. I think you have already seen this, but it can be depicted as this. This is the simplest version of his analysis, which is proposed in his 1957 paper, Meaning. When someone utters something with these first, second, third, if someone utters something with these three kinds of intentions, then we say that this person means something by their utterance. This is what Grice proposed in this article. So, actually, this analysis faced various counterexamples, and I personally do not think this approach really works. But the point is, what a speaker means is, for Grice, a matter of what they intend, and so what they conversationally implicate is a matter of what they intend as well. His characterization of conversational implicature, here and here, his characterization should be seen against this background. Speaker meaning is a matter of speaker's intention, so conversational implicature is also a matter of speaker's intention. So when he talks about conversational implicature, he talks about the speaker's mental states. So we have seen a matter of conversational implicature is a matter of intention. But what is intention? I think this point is not so known because he did not argue about intention in the most famous book, Studies in the Way of Words. This is argued in his 1971 article, Intention and Uncertainty. This article tackles this problem of what is intention. The intention is, Grice said, a peculiar kind of mental states. In some way, it resembles desires. Intention is future-directed mental states that motivate the agent's action. In this sense, it resembles desires, but in another way, it resembles belief. It has a kind of commitment to what happens in the world, or what holds in the world. So in this article, Grice examines various situations in which we use the word intention and argues that intention is actually a kind of complex mental states. It is a construct consisting of two more basic mental states, that is will and belief. Will is, Grice argues, is a future-directed mental state which motivates the agent's action. But Grice thinks we can have a will without no chance of achieving it. Grice's example is this. Imagine your head itching, but your hands are tied behind your back. Even if you could not actually scratch it, I mean, you could not actually scratch your head because your hands are tied, you'd have a certain state of mind directed toward scratching your head. In this case, you are said to have the will to scratch your head. Unlike wills, we cannot have intentions without no hope of achieving them. For example, it is strange to say, I have the intention to scratch my head when my hands are tied behind my back. And it is clear that I cannot do it. In that case, we cannot, we don't usually say, I have an intention to scratch my head. But wills and intentions are similar in that they orientate our future actions. Thus, Grice sees intentions to have two parts. Someone's intention to scratch their head contains their will that their hand should scratch their head as its part. But it also includes this, the belief that this will result in their hand actually scratching their head. So why do we think we cannot intend to scratch our heads when our hands are tied behind our backs? Because we do not believe the corresponding will, this will results in our hand scratching our head because it was tied. So in light of this understanding of intention, the conditions of speaker meaning can be decomposed as this. Each intention, there are three intentions behind the speaker meaning, according to his 1957 article. And each intention has a will part and a belief part. Thus, a matter of what the speaker means is now a matter of what wills and beliefs the speaker have when they make this utterance. So now, a matter of what a speaker conversationally implicate is a matter of what wills and beliefs they have in the context of the utterance. So now the problem is what these mental states, wills and beliefs are, and how we ascribe them to a person. What it means to say someone has a will or someone has a belief, and when can we say such a thing? Let us briefly summarize that what I have said so far. A conversational implicature is a kind of speaker meaning, and speaker meaning is understood in terms of speaker's intentions. So what the speaker conversationally implicates is a matter of what they mean, and this latter thing is a matter of what they intend. And we have seen an intention is a composite of a will and a belief. So what a speaker implicates is now a matter of what wills and beliefs they have in the context in question. Thus, to grasp the concept of conversational implicature in light of Grice's overall philosophy, we must look at his account of wills and beliefs. And this topic is discussed in his 1974 presidential address to American Philosophical Association. Its title is Method in Philosophical Psychology. First, I'd like to emphasize that for Grice, mental states are not literal states that we actually have in some sense. This point is explicit in this passage. Quote, "The approach which I'm interested in exploring is that of thinking of certain central psychological concepts as theoretical concepts. They are psychological concepts just because they are the primitive concepts which belong to a certain kind of psychological theory, without also belonging to any presupposed theory such as physiological theory, and a psychological theory is a theory whose function is to provide in a systematic way explanations of behavior, which differ from any explanations of behavior which may be provided by or may someday be provided by any presupposed theory such as physiological theory." This passage is related to his theory of theories, which he calls theory. He thinks of theories not as forming a hierarchical structure, but rather an overlapping each other. Some philosophers of reductionism assume that theories have a hierarchical structure in such a way that, for example, psychological theories are a part of more fundamental biological theories, and biological theories are a part of more fundamental physical or physiological theories, and so on. Thus, we can at least theoretically reduce psychological theories to physiological theories or something, and all of our talk about our mental states will be paraphrased by a talk about our physiological states, such as the states of our brain. This is what reductionists think. Grice does not take this way. For Grice, physiological theories and biological theories, for example, may have some common parts. For example, the mechanism of limb movement in animals may be treated in both physiological and biological theories. But he does not think biology can be reduced to physiology because they have different functions and accordingly different theoretical concepts, some of which cannot be translated into the other area. He refers to the function of a theory in this passage as well. For Grice, the function of a psychological theory is to provide explanations of an animal behavior. But these explanations are said to be different from the ones physiological theories provide. So important points here is that psychological concepts such as will and belief and intention, etc., are not really referring to real states we have, but they are theoretical concepts. And he thinks a psychological theory is a theory whose function is to provide explanations of behavior. So he thought psychological concepts are theoretical concepts which works to provide explanations of behavior. Here, he refers to different kinds of explanations. One is psychological and another is physiological. His reference to different types of explanations can be understood in light of his theory of reason and reasons. When I say, and when Grice says reason, it basically refers to human capacity. I mean, what is classically assumed to be a human essence. And when I say, and when Grice says reasons, it refers to reason of something, reason for something. Anyway, explanation is given based on reasoning inference. And in his lecture, Aspects of Reason, Grice said reasoning is a chain of inferences that consist in sequentially arriving at conclusions which are derivable from some initial set of premises. And for the acceptance of the conclusions. Therefore, these premises are thought to be reasons. Actually, Grice is, I think, a kind of classic style philosopher in that he thinks human beings are rational animals. And what is reason as human essence is the most important philosophical questions. And Grice often talks about Aristotle, a great philosopher in ancient Greece, and Immanuel Kant, the founder of German idealism. Both of them see reason as human essence. But what is different in Grice from these classical philosophers is that to analyze the concept of reason, he uses his method of conceptual analysis and looks at how we use words such as reasoning and reasons. As in the sentence, the reason for my absence is that I was ill, or something. He thinks these words, reasoning, and reasons are inherently related. For him, reason is a faculty of reasoning, and reasoning is, as this passage says, it's a chain of inferences that gives reason for the conclusion. So in other words, reason is a capacity to provide something with a reason why it happens. And this reason serves as a premise of the inference to the conclusion that it happens. Reason is a capacity to give a reason for something, and it is also the capacity to make reasoning. This is Grice's view of reason and reasoning and reasons. So how does his view on reason relate to his philosophy of mind? We have seen that for Grice, psychological theories have the function of providing explanations of animal behavior, which are different from the ones physiological theories provide. And providing explanation is a way of providing reasons for something. For example, when someone asks, "Why did your dog suddenly bark at me?" one will explain by providing a reason why the dog did so. Thus, psychological theories have the function of providing reasons for animal behavior. And these reasons are different from the reasons physiological theories give. In this context, we should look at Grice's distinction of three kinds of reasons. I mean, explanatory reasons and justificatory reasons, and justificatory explanatory reasons. This last one is also called personal reason. For example, when I say the reason why I came late was that I overslept, I'm providing a kind of causal explanation. So I'm saying my overslept caused my being late. Such a reason is called explanatory reason. But when I say the reason why I must resign is I don't think I'm compatible with this job. In this case, I'm not giving a causal explanation. Rather, I'm giving a justification for my future action, my resignation. Such a reason is called justificatory reasons. And sometimes we provide a justification for not future action, but for what we have already done, like the reason why I resigned is that I thought I deserve a better job. This is not a causal explanation. Rather, I'm picking up what was my justificatory reason for resignation as a reason for my already done action. Such a reason is called justificatory explanatory reason. Grice is not explicit, but having this distinction in mind, we can see that what Grice is saying in talking about, here, the different functions of psychological and physiological theories have is that the function of psychological theories is to provide the function of psychological theories is to provide this one, justificatory explanatory reason for the behavior. Why the reason physiological theories provide are this one, explanatory reasons. So, sorry, let's look back at what I've said so far about Grice's philosophy of mind. Psychological concepts such as will and belief are theoretical concepts used in psychological theories, which have the function to provide this one, justificatory explanatory reasons for behavior. So will, belief, and other mental states are something positive to give justificatory explanatory reasons for someone's behavior. Giving reasons for something is, as I said, making an inference from the positive reasons to the something. So according to Grice, psychological theories provide such an inference from the positive reason to the, relevant action. But how do we do this? Let's take a look at how Grice thinks it works. Imagine there are nuts in front of a person, this person X, and then X eats them. So in this case, the fact that there are nuts in front of X works as one of the premises. There might be other premises such as here nuts are human food, familiar human food, or X is short on human food, X is hungry. Human food is necessary for human beings. That means without human food, human beings will die. And X is a human being or something. Maybe there are more additional premises, but anyway, there are many premises. And this is the conclusion of the inference we must make. X eats the nuts. So our task is to make an inference from these premises to this conclusion. And Grice thinks this inference takes a form of deduction, not induction or abduction, deduction. So we must make a deductive inferential bridge between the premises and the conclusion. And Grice says, at this point, we rely on psychological concepts. According to Grice, we have various psychological actions, various psychological actions such as this. And these actions contain psychological concepts in them. And we apply these actions to construct the desired inference. I put these actions in a simpler term than Grice, but he supposes there is such an action as this. If n is necessary for t, then prolonged non-intake of n will cause a member of t to will for n. Here, a psychological concept of will here comes. Now, putting human food here, here, putting human food in N and human beings in T, and then we have this: if human food is a necessity for human being, then prolonged non-intake of human food will cause a member of human beings to will for human food. And together with the assumptions, this X is short on human food, X, there's prolonged non-intake of human food on X. Then, and this one, and an assumption X is a human being. And then we deduce this: X wills human food. Human food is a necessity for human beings here. And prolonged non-intake of N here. X is short on human food. And X is a member of human being. So X wills human food. This is just a deductive inference. And Grice thinks there is also an action such as this. For any member of T, if something of a familiar object type F is in a familiar relation R to them, they perceive an F as R. So supposing nuts, familiar object type, and being in front, this is a familiar relation, then we get this: X perceives nuts as in front of them. And let's stop the deduction this line for once and take up another action. This one is complicated and wrong, but Grice claimed it to be an action that if for some n which is a necessity for X type, for some action A which is in X repertoire, and for some F and R familiar to X, X has sufficiently frequently, when X is for n, performed A upon an F which have been related to by R to X, and as a result has ceased to instantiate will for n, then X joins n with A and F. Joining in Grice's sense is a kind of mental state, and it actually is a kind of belief. So the phrase X joins N with A and F means, in fact, that X believes that A-ing an F satisfies their will for N. So yeah, it is complicated, but let's put human food here, N, and human beings X type, and eating in A, and nuts in F, and being in front in R. Then it says it says if X has sufficiently frequently when X wills for human food, ate nuts in front of them, and as a result has ceased to will for N, then X believes that eating nuts satisfies their will for human food. And suppose the antecedent is true, that is, X has a number of experiences where they ate nuts when they were hungry, and as a result, they stopped to feel hungry. From this supposition and this action together, we can deduce this one. X believes that eating nuts will satisfy their will for human food. Now we have X will prehension and belief. Here Grice introduces another action, this one. And together all of this, we can deduce X eats the nuts. So now we have a deductive inference from these premises to this conclusion. And psychological attitudes such as, sorry, just for a minute. Psychological attitudes such as will, prehension, and belief are not supposed to be something X in fact has in brain or mind. They are theoretical devices to make this kind of inference. And when and as far as we make such an inference, we can ascribe the mental states that appear in the inference, this one, to X. This is Grice's theory of mind. So what about speaker meaning and what about conversation implicature? If we follow Grice's argument, we must think of them in the same way. In the case of utterance interpretation, the relevant action is the speaker's utterance. This is what we must give a reason for. It is not clear what the premises are in this case. They might be concerning the speaker's physical situation, such as a dog is in front of them, or they have injured their right hand. They might include social situations, such as the speaker is a friend of the hearer. Whatever they are, the task is to make an inference from these premises to the conclusion that the speaker uttered blah blah. To make such an inference, we need various actions. Some actions are general psychological ones, such as we have seen before. I think conversational maxims should be understood as among psychological actions. This understanding is compatible with the fact that Grice claims conversational maxims have counterparts outside the realm of verbal communication. And philosophers such as Richard Warner and Richard Grundy, who are the editors of Grice's Festschrift, argue that Grice's analysis of sentence meaning as consisting of a loose connection between utterance type and the type of speaker's meaning. I mean, they say sentence meaning is gives a kind of psychological action, And according to this picture, we cannot infer what the speaker conversation implicate from just their utterance and the conversation implicatures. Conversation maxims, sorry. We must deduce their psychological steps, step by step, using various psychological actions. And we must fill the gap between these premises and the conclusion first. And it is only when we find relevant wills and beliefs that we can assume the speaker conversationally implicated something. So I think if Grice himself conceived Gricean pragmatics, it would be a search for psychological actions we need to explain human communication behavior. So he would think of it as a part of general philosophical psychology, not as an enterprise that is specific to language and communication. So I don't think this kind of project is promising today, or we should do pragmatics this way in contemporary context. I don't think so. But my aim was just to reconstruct what was in Grice's mind and nothing more. But if some of you get interested in Grice's philosophy, overall philosophy, I couldn't be happier. So, sorry, it takes too long, but thank you for listening. And it was my pleasure to be here. Really pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, now the time for discussion. So any questions or comment from the audience or online audience? Okay, Toyoka-san, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And maybe my question is just clarifying and maybe basic question. So when we talk about the meaning, we can attach meaning to two different objects. The first one is maybe the type or sentence. The other one is token or utterance or something.
Yeah.
And when Grice talked about the meaning, I think that it's just my intuition, but I think that he talks about the meaning of utterance because intention differs from situation to situation and person to person.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the relation between the meaning of the utterance and the meaning of a sentence in Grice's perspective? So what is the relation between?
Thank you for the question. It is actually discussed in his, wait a minute. His, this one, he discussed about sentence meaning in attribute meaning, sentence meaning, and word meaning. And he basically thinks sentence, he basically thinks of sentence meaning in terms of intention as well. In what way? in this way, as you say, intention differs context to context. So it's not that any sentence is related to particular, any sentences are related to particular intention. But Grice says that, how to say, when we say a sentence has such and such a meaning, we actually say when an ordinary speaker uses this sentence, they normally have such and such an intention. In this way, he analyzes sentence meaning in terms of default connection between intention type and sentence. And in such analysis, he uses as a basis his analysis of speaker meaning. So this is his connection between speaker meaning and sentence meaning.
Okay, but there is some slight difference between utterance to utterance, even though they use the same sentence, right?
Yeah.
So in this sense, such a difference lies on the difference of propositional content or the thing other than propositional content. Or so what I want to ask is, even though they utter the same sentence,
yeah.
the meaning of utterance can differ. So in this point, the propositional content differs, or propositional content is the same, or which one? So
it depends on what propositional content refers to. If you are saying what speaker means different in different contexts, yeah, how to say? Yeah,
so it depends on how. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Sentence meaning is constant across the context, but speakers' intentions are different And then what the speaker means are different because the speaker's intentions are different. In this sense, proportional contents can be different even if they use the same sentence.
Okay. So it depends on how to stipulate the notion of propositional content.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very interesting point that you made by sort of subsuming a theory of implicature as kind of subvariant of a like psychology. So when it comes to that, I have this question about Grice's interpretation, what he meant by justification for the following reason. So we, of course, do sometimes unjustifiable things, right? Or you mentioned Aristotle, so akrasia, the weakness of will, acting against one's own judgment, that kind of things. I suppose that is, subject of psychology as well. So there can be two senses of justification, just a strong sense of justification of like explaining something as justified. That as opposed to sometimes we do kind of bad things, but those were the reasons. Okay. I suppose psychologists would, if any justifying explanation would take the second sense of justification.
Yeah.
Or else they wouldn't be able to explain, acting against one's baseline judgment or that kind of thing. On the other hand, the theory of implicature, if you want to sort of explain that in this term, I think you need the first sense of justification, no? Because if you take the second sense, then people may be saying stupid things, and that may be it. So it seems like you need a first sense of justification for the theory of implicature, while you need psychologists need a second sense of justification for psychology. So I'm wondering what Grice's take was when it comes to the notion of justification.
Thank you. It's a really good question. It's actually related to his theory of reason. I agree that theory of conversation implicature needs the first sense of justification. And what Grice is talking about in this case is the second kind of justification. It's true, but for Grice, making this kind of reasoning inference is is a result of this person's usage of their reason as a faculty, essential faculty as a human being. And Grice thinks, we can actually use reasons, sometimes maybe very often use reason very badly. But as a reason, we have a certain kind of norm. Grice says, I don't agree, but Grice says, as a reasonable, rational beings, we know what kind of reasoning is better or best, even if we ourselves do not always make such a good inference. So so in Grice's theory, we ordinarily, we normally make justification in the second sense, but we in some sense know what the justification in the first sense is like, and we aim for this direction. We try to make the first kind of strong sense of justification. So in this sense, the first sense of justification, the second sense of justification is not, I mean, internally related in Grice's theory. So yeah, it's not it's not properly answer to your question, but
That's very interesting.
yeah, but what do I say? Yeah, so in some sense, Grice thinks research of human psychology includes such a strong sense of justification. Do I make sense?
Yeah. That makes sense. Great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have two more questions. One is from Risatoru-san.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Grice's philosophy of language is reduced to theory of implicature, and theory of implicature is reduced to Grice's axiomatic theory of mind. So for me, this slide shows Grice's axiomatic theory of mind of this slide seems to seems a typical theory philosophy of action, desire and desire and belief explain action. What is the difference between Grice's axiomatic theory of mind and typical philosophy of action explanation?
Thank you.
Difference.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's at first sight, I agree. It looks like a typical theory of action, but I think typical theory of action is something like that. We ascribe a belief and intention, and then we can explain the agent's action. It's not what Grice says. The point is, Grice thinks these actions make our, these actions are our psychological theories. And wait a minute.
Yeah.
These actions are general one, not a particular ascription of mental states to a particular person. So, but standard theory of action is based on particular situation, particular agents, particular mental states. This point is different. The difference between Grice's theory and classical theory. Grice's theory is based on just this kind of general formula.
No.
And this kind of ascription is just a result from this action and these premises. And these premises do not have reference to mental states. This is not assumed. This is reduced, deduced. This point is a difference, I think.
I think that theory of typical theory of action can result to some kind of action like this. Perhaps, I hope. I think that perhaps even typical theory of action can result to Grice's action like action, Grice's action.
It can be but
Yeah. Yeah.
not necessary, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Yanaka-san,
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for your interesting talk. So maybe related to Suzuki-san's questions, and in my understanding of Grice's axiomatic theory of mind, there are different types of actions in the deduction. Is it right? And so sorry. If my understanding is correct, I would like to know where does Grice think each type of action is given from, or how each action emerges. So.
Thank you. It's it's important question. Actually, Grice is not so explicit in that point, but at some point, Grice says they're just our folk psychological theory. I mean, living as a human beings in this society, we, I don't know what process, but we naturally learn this kind of actions. This is what Grice says, and I don't think it's, I mean, it's compelling, but yeah, Grice says nothing beyond that.
I see. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
okay, so thank you very much for this very interesting talks. So stimulating our thought about pragmatics and our understanding of theory of implicature. So let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.